So the other day, I discussed how sometimes when I make jollof rice and stuff, I cut up the onions and I make the vegetables and whatnot, and then I, you know, add a little bit of barbecue sauce. Well, when I mean a little bit, I mean like three, four, 15 squirts of it, because I feel like life's too short. Let's up the flavor a bit. This is not to say that jollof rice is not really perfect, intrinsically, but I feel maybe I could have some originality, and I guess at the very least this would stop people judging my quality of jollof rice because it's not jollof rice anymore. It's this kind of bastardized version of it. It's still fundamentally the same rice, but just a bit of a twist. Now I say this because I was thinking about things about how traditions and society, uh, traditions in society do permeate through the ages, and certain customs become concrete almost to who we are as a people. Persons within a people. If you get exactly what I mean by that. And this made me think of what is called the meta, especially in most like competitive video games. We call it the meta. What's known as the trends, the common trends amongst players in a video game. To give you a random example, in Pokemon in Generation 4, it was quite very common to run things like a Dragon Knight with a Gengar and then run a Heat Ran because you had special and physical attack damage. But where Heat Ran was weak to ground moves, you had two Pokemon that weren't weak to ground moves, so it kind of balanced out and their weaknesses compensated for each other and strengths. This became a heavy trend, so they became meta. So meta as an adjective as well as a noun, like the meta, like the common trends. This is a very interesting thing to me because, as someone who is very prone to be a bit non-conformist of sorts, I always thought about, the impact of my actions and what does it mean when I kind of just do things for the sake of it without any purpose, unlike other people. So if I'm talking to someone and I start trying to do a handstand, and for me the challenge is I'll do a handstand and try and listen to them, but obviously in a general society that's quite strange. And I thought about loads of other things that are quite common, things that you also have to keep mindful of when you make discussions, especially when discussing things like, maybe social change over time or, cultural clashes, for example. So, for example, the concept of arranged marriages is treated differently depending on what part of the world you're in. And often as you grow up, depending on which society you grow up in, you grow up with this idea of the meta that people in my society have arranged marriages, or people in my society are heavily against them, or other things like a big one, for example, is monogamy. So when I discuss things with people, I always mention the common trend or the meta that is monogamy. Monogamy is the meta, in the way that say generally like heterosexuality is the meta that we live in. It's the common trend. Two things obviously come from this, potential conflict or potential conflict of ideas, but also the likely jump from things being the common trend to being the only viable thing. And often this can obviously lead to problems of people being dehumanized just for being different in some way, shape, or form, being seen as barbaric. Family arranged marriages or polygamy or polyamory, for example, is quite a strange thing for a lot of people. I don't know. I thought like about motivations for being part of the meta and not being part of it. So obviously being part of it, you think of it like often things come about and become the common trend because they had some form of use back in the day, or some form of practicality or some form of appeal. Like when I described the whole Pokemon example, it became common to use these Pokemon because they're quite powerful and they can compensate for each other's weaknesses and strengths, and they synergize with each other. But then it gets to the point where if it becomes so common, that becomes seen as the only viable way or the best way, or the necessary way to play the game, you know, people are, you know, scolded for not even thinking in this realm of Gengar, Heatran, you know, Gyarados, and Dragon Knight, because, you know, originality is strange, it's weird, it's threatening. Why would I do this weird thing? Why would I play Victory Bell? Why would I play Drapion? When I can play this. This works. Why must we change? It works. It clearly works. You know. So that's the appeal of things working in practicality. That will always be there. Obviously, the downside is this, you know, debasement or discrediting of original thoughts, even if they are not the most optimal thing. But the idea that the original thoughts in themselves, you know, are seen as harmful, especially given the fact that metas change, societies do change over time, ideas and common trends will change slightly over time, which shows that what may not work now will have some viability. In video games, it normally becomes part of a patch, because certain situations have been set up now by the game maker which mean that a certain thing in a given game isn't as effective as it used to be. But in society, this is often facilitated through, you know, some form of governmental force. I don't know, for example, the effects on business now that gay marriages are completely legitimized in American law, for example. What will this mean for the economy? You know, how many more gay wedding cakes will be made? Will this cause a higher demand in resources? You know, should we push for more people to adopt, you know, vegan resources, for example, especially when not necessary, you know, milk substitutes, these things. So I don't know, I've seen a slight trend where maybe 5-10 years ago, alternative milks were a bit rarer, and the soy milk was shit. Let's just keep it real. As a kid, soy milk was shit. Maybe because I was just a kid. But now there's a whole range of things because the facilitation has been put there for this little shift. Especially given the fact that more and more people are at least trying or at least attempting veganism, for example. So the market's there. There's the market trend that's changed, you know, caused by societal change and all these things. But yeah, things shift. So it's strange to look at things that are quite creative as strange or, you know, deviant in a bad way. You know, I don't think deviance is necessarily a pejorative term. I never thought of it that way. You know, in some sense, you know, the fact that deviant is somewhat of a homonym of defiant shows it's just a sign of being oneself, you can argue. But yeah, looking at reasons for not conforming, it's obvious, you know, if you can rely on yourself and be yourself and have your thoughts, you can have the pride, especially if this works for you. If things work out, you can say, I was the pioneer. You can be the pioneer. You can be the Christopher Columbus, LOL, if you want to go down that road. I don't know, resisting to the urge to make a joke here about, you know, pioneering Native American, you know, genocide. But you can be the one who went outside of the circle and made it work. You can be, we'll give an example, you know, the rise of gospel-infused rap music. You know, you see from Chance the Rapper, you'll see from Stormzy, for example. You know, they're breaking out of this general schema of, you know, rap music being, you know, the stereotypical things of, okay, there might be some nice beats, some nice flow, but doesn't say as much as it seemed to used to, maybe back in the 90s, you know, or the same stories have been told, you know, we get it. You engage in sexual relations, you know, you may have caused some violent situations at some point, but breaking away from that, you know, it's like carving out your own path. So maybe in 15 years time we'll look back at what Chance the Rapper did in a colouring book and say, oh, that was really the pinpoint start of, you know, the emergence of, you know, Christian infused hip hop and whatnot. So it can work, but obviously there's the whole side of, if it doesn't work or isn't seen as obviously working, because it's not like, even if it works for you, you know, in society, if it doesn't work for society or greater society, it's still strange, it's still deviant in some way, you know, because it doesn't have any use for them. Esports is a good example. How in the esports scene, there's obvious viability, there's obvious value in it. People do make money, but even ignoring the money side, it's a sight of seeing people compete and work at something and push each other to greatness. In a video game or whatever it is. There's a value in that. But from the outside, the mainstream media, for example, through lack of understanding or lack of willingness to really embrace it or even try to understand the scene, they see it as this inviolable thing. It's quite the strange thing that these kids do in their basements, for example. Yeah, key thing is the question of when we talk about society and change. I feel some people are too fearful that things can't change, that you can never break away from these things, but they often do forget that we have changed, necessarily so. These examples, the fact that I am speaking English despite being the child of a person from Sierra Leone is a sign of people breaking out from their roots, breaking out from societies and taboos that may or may not have been there, or attitudes that may or may not have been there. You can write them down and list, the view of African persons by Europe, or the view of Europe by African persons, and so on. Sniff, sniff. But yeah, to be honest, it was just a short thought, just discussing and thinking about why do we adopt things, why do we break away from things, and the usefulness factor, and how we are prone to see things as in quite a binary useful uselessness manner, rather than thinking of maybe it might have value in the future, or we never know, or just looking for its intrinsic value in things, but along with that, the awkwardness of being different and making it work, even if it doesn't work for the rest of society, I guess can be quite strange and quite maybe threatening to some people, especially because you're like, this is our way of life, and people have this feeling that our way of life was built in this manner, it was built with this history, the American way, the British way, the pride that comes with the past achievements, so like connecting back with the Commonwealth, for example, is the sign of the pride of the things that were achieved during like the colonial era and all that stuff. And I always point this out, it's weird, we can be proud of things that have been achieved by persons in the UK. Of course we can. Isaac Newton, massive shit, right? Not as in pejorative, like good pejorative, like these shit. Like he was the shit. And he even achieved lifelong celibacy. We can be proud of Isaac Newton as a Brit, or Shakespeare as a Brit, even if maybe it's part of their funding or part of the reason why they were able to do so is because of the freedom they had from the privileges of being, white in a society that, was starting to make money off colonization. For example, you don't have to, I know it feels strange being proud of conquest in a weird way, but you can be proud of the things you achieved that were partially dependent on the conquest. Like the amount of expansion that Ottomans had, leading to an explosion in like culture, for example. Suleiman the Great, for example. You can always look at these things and think, okay, they were funded by terrorists or funded by, people who we'd see as depravable today, but they did something good that can never be taken away from them. He wrote the Principia, he wrote all these good works, they made this really amazing artwork, composed this amazing symphony. But yeah, sorry, I went on a tangent there. So we see this need, I should say, to hold on to the past and hold on to every bit of the past. 'Cause that's how those are the conditions in which we created a Shakespeare, or we created an Isaac Newton, or we created Rutherford, for example, in these conditions. So why don't we hold on to everything rather than just saying, let's just set up greater conditions in which we can produce more Rutherfords and more Peter John Higgs, because Peter John Higgs exists in a world where homosexuality is legal, You know, racial discrimination is illegal. You know, women have the vote, for example. So long story short, I think we can be fine, but of course, to be deviant may just be either you breaking away, being destructive, or it may be breaking away from the bits of destructive, small bits of the destructive nature that we are still stuck in, the little trends or the ideas that still hold us back in some way. Like someone who's polyamory will obviously argue against the hard and fast meta that monogamy is the only viable relationship setup, for example. I feel like we should look more to whether things work rather than what has worked before. There's quite an experimental approach as opposed to just sticking, only breaking out the circle a little bit. So only like slowly breaking out the circle. Like, okay, if we expand the circle like this, we're good. Rather than saying, oh, all these things rotate around the circle. Some of them are retrograde. And, just letting them in slowly, and just seeing what can be done or what works rather than what has worked, But then, why let go of the past? Fuck that, right? I'm just saying, try jollof rice with a bit of barbecue sauce, drop a sweet chili, and then towards the very end, put like a bit of, what is it all? Put a bit of Nando's sauce at the end. I mean, don't call it jollof rice if you want, but it's good rice, whatever it is, I guess.